get started, I want to welcome all of you on behalf of the Alliance. Martha Redmond from the League of Women Voters of Sussex County will greet you on behalf of the League of Women Voters. But I just want to say it is wonderful to look outside and see the sea of faces who are here to talk about something which has been the mission of the Alliance and the mission of the League and the mission of the library, and it seems to grow. In that Friday night I had the opportunity to go to Camp Rehoboth, where they celebrated Black History Month and had a fantastic art show featuring Black artists and a wonderful speaker from the University of Delaware. That was not part of my remarks, but I've only got 3 minutes, so I better rush and do my remarks. I should give you the respect of standing, but the last time I stood in this room, I fell. So not to embarrass myself, I'm sitting, if you'll forgive me. Brian Stevenson, a native Delawarean, said that we must replace hopelessness with hope. We must have public dialogue about that which we are most uncomfortable with, namely our egregious past history, which included the enslavement, mistreatment, denial of the enslaved's humanity, and the continuation of denial of basic respect and justice for Black people. He encourages us to end the narrative of racial differences, because despite progress, it continues, and it is so nice to see such a wonderfully diverse group tonight. Tonight's presentation, Exploring America's Racist Past, featuring the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, is another opportunity to dialogue together. I am so pleased that the League of Women Voters of Sussex County and the Lewes Library and the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice have worked together to bring you this presentation, because the more partnerships we have, the more we can be guaranteed that that dialogue will carry outside of our specific organizations. I'm equally pleased that the family of Brian Stevenson is here tonight and will bring us greetings from Mr. Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative, and tell us briefly about an initiative that is about to start in Sussex County that will further the public discourse. I'm going to introduce the two members of Mr. Stevenson's family who will speak to us after the panel presentation, because the panel is going to talk about the past, and I hope that Mrs. Stevenson's family will talk about the current opportunities. So let me introduce Mrs. Alana Berry, a member of the Stevenson family, and Christy Taylor, who is Brian's sister. So we'll be patient with us. It's a long presentation, and the library gave us the keys to close up. And so for those of you who are not used to being here after 8, a voice will come on and say, we are about to close. Don't leave. We have the keys. We will close up afterwards. Our presenters, so ladies, we'll talk later. Our presenters are here tonight to tell us about their trip to the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, both created by the Equal Justice Initiative, so that we can learn how the sins of the past play a big role in how we think about race in the present. It offers us a more accurate history of what went on between the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil Rights Movement, because a lot of that history is missing, and a lot of our children don't seem to know what went on between the Emancipation and the Civil Rights Movement, or even what goes on now. Let me introduce our panelists, and I not only admire them, but I envy the fact that they were able to go to Alabama and see the museums. Valerie Reeves of Ocean City. Valerie, raise your hand.
Ocean View.
Ocean View. And that's reading off a piece of paper, wow. A member of Lower Sussex NAACP, a member of the Alliance, a member of the Sussex Community Gospel Choir and director of the South Coastal AARP, will channel the panel. Rosemary Hendrix, who accompanied Valerie on the trip of South Bethany, is a member of the League of Women Voters of Sussex County, member of the Alliance, a member of AAUW, a mediator at Community Justice Center, a member of Thresholds at Sussex Correctional Institution, and the Ministerium of Bethany Beach Christian Church. Our third panelist is Alicia Jones of Lewes, who is a member of the Alliance, the Minority Community Liaison Committee, which has been advising Cape Henlopen School District for the past year, the Sunshine Ladies Circle, and the St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Lewes. We will have a fourth panelist, Don Flood, who was at the opening of the museums, but he teaches on Tuesday in Georgetown, and he said he will rush down the highway and hopefully get here to give his impressions of the museum, which by then you'll have lots of information on. I hope that tonight's gathering will encourage all of us to continue the conversation when we leave this room and rejoin our communities, families, and friends. We have the capacity to do so. We have the tools if we believe our greatest philosophers, including Jesus Christ, Plato, Aristotle, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and Stevenson, who spoke of the transformative power of love, a strong moral perspective, and a true sense of justice. If we believe that through our shared humanity we have more in common than our differences that have been legitimized through false narrative, then we can conquer hate and racism. Let me now turn it over to the panel. Valerie?
Rosemary's up first. Rosemary, wait for it to turn green. Did you turn it? You want to take mine? Mine's on.
Okay, I have not used this before, and I have been warned. You can hear me? Yes. One thing I thought about the other day before I kind of forgot about, the first group that I was involved with, like Southern Delaware Alliance, was a group called the Coalition for Tolerance and Justice, and Christy Taylor was a part of that group. Peter Schott, who is here, was a part of that group, and Sharita Kavera, who is part of this group, was also a part of it. And we also had Christy give us her brother to speak a couple of times, so it was really an honor. And if you want a sister who is proud as her brother as she can be, Christy is the one, and she has lots to be proud of. Valerie planned this trip, and she does a great job of anything she does, and she gets to be involved in all kinds of things maybe I shouldn't be doing sometimes. Now, I'm going to talk about Brian and things I've learned about him. And I went online and I listened to many of his talks, and I would highly recommend you do that. He is an amazing speaker. He is an amazing person. And I'm going to list some of the things about him. Brian Stevenson is the founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. He has said, "The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned." Under his leadership, Equal Justice Initiative has won major legal battles, eliminating excessive and unfair sentencing, exonerating death row prisoners, confronting the abuse of the incarcerated and the mentally ill, and aiding children prosecuted as adults. He won a case in the United States Supreme Court prohibiting the mandatory life without parole sentences for all children 17 or younger. And working with the Thresholds program at SCI, there were people there who had been sentenced under that and eventually are getting out. Brian Stevenson and his staff have won the reversals and relief of over 125 wrongly condemned prisoners on death row. Brian has initiated major new anti-poverty and anti-discrimination efforts that challenge the legacy of racial inequality of America, with the opening of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Legacy Museum, from enslavement to mass incarceration. A few of the awards he has won are the MacArthur Foundation Genius Prize, the National Medal of Liberty from the ACLU, where he had been nominated by Supreme Court Justice John Stevens. He has an award for public service, human rights, courageous advocacy, civil rights, social progress, and it just goes on and on. He has received at least 29 honorary doctorate degrees. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Just Mercy, which was named by Time magazine as one of the 10 best books of nonfiction in 2014. One of the honors for the book was the Carnegie Medal by the American Library Association for the best nonfiction of 2014, and he was called the United States Mandela by Desmond Tutu. I sometimes wonder what molds with Bryan Stevenson. Many people care, many people want change, but Bryan has devoted his life to caring and making change. He was born in Milton, Delaware, which I think is wonderful. Yes. He had a grandmother whose parents had been slaves. He had hardworking, caring parents, and he says a mother who was very strong and would stand up for herself and her family. His grandmother was strong and loving and big on hugs. He has a brother Howard and a sister Christy who are both in education and active in social justice. And when I say, what molds a person like this, one of the stories he tells on many of his tapes is about his grandmother. When he was about 10 or 11, she pulled him aside and said, "Bryan, I need to talk to you." So he went back outside or somewhere with her, and she said to him, "Bryan, I've been watching you. You're really special. You're different than everyone else. You can be anything you want to be. But I want to ask you 3 things." One of them was to love your mother, do the hard things, and never drink alcohol. So a little bit later, a few years later, probably he was 14, 15, his brother Howard, who was older, and I think he took Christy with him, had beer. They went around the backyard, and he wanted Bryan to drink. And Bryan said no. And he said again, "Well, you always do what I ask you to do." And Bryan said, "No, I'm not drinking." And after a few more times, Howard said, "Oh, grandmother told you the same thing she told me, right? You're really special, and you shouldn't drink." Anyway, he said, as of the writing then or speaking then, he said he's never had alcohol. Whether he's had it since then, I don't know. But I think it's a great story, and I think that's the kind of thing that molds somebody, having people tell you that you're special also. Okay. He went to a colored elementary school, and he remembered lawyers coming into the community to help integrate the schools. He went to Cape Henlopen High School, he attended Eastern University, and then Harvard Law School. Bryan was a philosophy major at Eastern University, and says, as he was about to graduate, he realized nobody was going to pay him to philosophize. He now needed a profession. So he was going to graduate school, and trying to find a major for graduate school and a possible profession, he realized that the law was the only path he could take where you really needed to know nothing about the law. If you wanted to be a doctor, if you knew some chemistry or something, he could take philosophy and go into the law. So he went to Harvard Law School, where he received a full-time scholarship. As part of a class on race and poverty, he found his calling. After graduating from Harvard, he moved to Atlanta and joined the Southern Center for Human Rights full-time. At that time, the center was funded by Congress and assisted in helping lower-income people facing the death penalty. Congress eliminated this funding in 1994, and Bryan funded the nonprofit Equal Justice Initiative. He founded the Equal Justice Initiative. If you go online and check, I always go online and check these places. Charity Navigator gives EJI 100% rating in all areas. He's doing everything right. So if you want to donate, putting a little plug here, If you want to donate, this is a good place to donate. Brian has founded his museums because he doesn't like the way Brian has founded his museums because he doesn't like the way history is taught and feels education of the public will help. According to what I heard him say online, we act as if the race problem was solved in 3 days. Day 1, Rosa Parks wouldn't get a bumper seat on the bus. Day 2, Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And day 3, the civil rights laws were passed. That would have been very nice, but it didn't work that way, and we are still working on it. We teach history all year, and then we take a month to talk about Black history. Black history is not separate from white history. There is really no way to separate it. Blacks were brought to this country as slaves, and from the first day of slavery, we have been interconnected. I know women's history is treated separately too, so when we talk about history, a lot of it is his story, a white man's story. Alabama celebrates Robert E. Lee's birthday on the same day as Martin Luther King. It celebrates the Confederacy Memorial Day and has the first Confederacy White House. We actually saw it from the outside. Nobody wanted to go in. Okay. He chose to live in a state where history is very distorted, and the Confederacy in some ways lives on, but a state that fits his criteria for making change. Many people thought the memorial would be too controversial. That didn't stop him. He has also placed plaques through the city marking slave markets and lynchings.
Excuse me for a moment. Can everyone make sure they cap off their cell phones? Go ahead, Rosemary. I'm sorry.
Brian says, if we are going to change the problems dealing with race, we need to do 4 things. Right now, I don't think anybody has any doubt that the racial problems have not been resolved. Anybody here think everything is good? According to Brian, we need to, 1, be proximate with the people who need our support. To my thought, that would be the incarcerated, the homeless, the people trying to improve their lives and the lives of their children, but are finding it hard to do because of past prejudice and something called white privilege. With some of us, it's just getting to know a person of color, or a person of color getting to know a white person. We especially need to get proximate to the youth who are not receiving the education they deserve. Another thing he believes is that wealth is not the opposite of poverty. Justice is. We need to change, number 2, we need to change the narrative. We need to recognize that addiction is a health problem. It's one of the narratives to change, not a criminal act. We need to change the politics of fear and anger that causes people to fear blacks. We talk about black on black crime as so terrible because how could 2 people of the same color hurt each other? We don't talk about white on white crime. We don't fear white on black crime, but black on white is very scary. Number 3, we need to stay hopeful. How many times have we said or heard, it's always been that way? My favorite is the poor will always be with us. They don't have to be. We have enough in this country that we can make change. Taking Brian's approach that justice is the opposite of poverty, we may be able to come up with solutions. Number 4, we need to be willing to do uncomfortable things and have uncomfortable conversations. That's a hard one because I always keep thinking, what are those uncomfortable conversations? I think just the word black and white sometimes makes me, writing this and reading what I wrote, thinking about it, I use the word black and white so many times. I'm not sure if there's something else we can't do. One of the ways to do this will be through truth and reconciliation councils, where people admit what they have done, explain why they know it was wrong, and work to change their behavior. I think we have a whole bunch of people in the government and in our country today. Maybe we should give them a chance to do that, or maybe they should try it instead of making up the stories and the lies and the excuses that they do. At this point, we have people lying, making excuses, and trying to make things sound better than they were, because no one wants to be uncomfortable. They also may be afraid of the consequences. But if the only consequences are the public humiliation that you receive from telling the truth, it could be freeing. We need also to change the narrative and not say whites humiliated blacks by treating them unfairly, but the only ones humiliated were the whites who humiliated themselves by their behavior. The black person being spit on was not being humiliated. It was the white doing the spitting that was humiliating himself. How many people have seen pictures? There's a picture a long time ago of some girl yelling, another one of somebody spitting. And I always think, I wonder as they got older, if they look at that picture and what did they think? I hope they thought, I wish that hadn't been me. Visiting a museum in Alabama makes you very uncomfortable for good reason. Maybe we need to be made uncomfortable. The National Museum for Peace and Justice may be just the thing to make us uncomfortable and also make us amenable to some needed conversations. Living in Alabama is a good practice ground for his criteria for change. The museum is on a 6-acre site overlooking the state capitol and is dedicated to over 4,000 victims of racial terror. At the center of the outdoor museum is a walkway with 800 columns hanging from the roof. On each column is the name of a county and the people lynched there. The columns meet you first at eye level, but as you walk, the floor slowly descends and leaves you looking up as if you were at a public lynching. Reasons are described in brief summaries along the walk. A few examples. Parks Bank was lynched in Mississippi in 1921 for carrying a picture of a white woman. Cal Adley was hanged in Kentucky for walking behind the wife of his white employer. Your families came and watched the hangings, had lunch, cheered. So hard to believe. As you walk through the memorial, you are asked not to pose with the statues and to honor the victims. As you read the names, walk among the columns, and view the statues of slaves, it does make you wonder how this could have happened, and you feel the need to do this quietly, ponder what happened, and perhaps say a prayer for those who were lynched and for those who did the lynching, trying to understand how one human being could treat another in such a way. Then you visit the museum that takes you from slavery to mass incarceration. And as a white person, it was upsetting to see how the end of slavery did not put an end to the power of someone who was white over a black person. I guess I hear people say when we talk of racism, that blacks can be as racist as whites. I say we can say whites are racist because they had the power to stop blacks from getting jobs, going to schools, living in certain communities, staying in some hotels, eating in restaurants, being able to use restrooms or fountains, and the list goes on. Blacks may dislike whites because of their behavior, but they never had the power to restrict whites. They couldn't lynch a white person for any infraction that displeased them. The whites did. I think Brian would like us to claim who we were, not always good, apologize and accept, and then find a way to move on together. I would recommend reading Brian's book, Just Mercy. And I'd also recommend reading the one written by Ray Hitton, The Sun Does Shine. You get a lot of information there too. And please go online and look up some of Brian's talks. They are just wonderful. He will give you much to think about and hopefully the desire to be proximate. Change the narrative, be hopeful, and have the uncomfortable conversations. Hope everyone is giving some thought to what is the conversation we should be having and thinking of ways to get into these conversations. Brian has said, somebody has to stand when other people are sitting. Somebody has to speak when others are quiet. Brian is doing just that, and we need to join him. This group, the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, is a good place to start. The only thing I thought when I read that one about somebody has to stand when others are sitting, I thought about Rosa Parks, who had to sit when they asked her to stand. So whatever the situation is, be ready to have the uncomfortable talks. Thank you.
We're going to hold any questions until the end of the panel presentation.
Okay. As slavery dominated the culture of the South, making it prosperous for landowners, black people sought ways to endure their plight. From 1877 to 1950, Jim Crow laws made it difficult for black people to realize what the Emancipation Proclamation was about. Although the Civil War was lost to the North to rid it of the vestiges of slavery, the South resolved to keep it denied. Lynching became the primary mechanism of the day to keep free people in fear and subjugation. In that 75-year-old period, more than 4,000 black men and women were tortured and killed with no justice. White supremacy has its roots in degradation and segregation to demean and deny full citizenship to people of color. I'm going to share with you some of the slides that we took from our trip and the museum. Let's see. All right. We got to the Civil Rights Museum first, and we couldn't take pictures inside. This was a gallery. You sign your name on a wall, and your signature comes up on the screen. The other few slides are from the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta. Okay, this is Dr. King's crypt. And Eternal Flame, that's in Atlanta. Now we're going to see the Elbert Parr Tuttle Courthouse. He was a Fifth Circuit Court judge and a U.S. Court of Appeals judge from 1968 to 1981. He was appointed by Eisenhower, and he was known for crucial decisions in advancing civil rights. The courthouse, which bears his name, was designated a National Historic Landmark in 2015. Okay, the Mooresford lynching sign is the site of two couples were killed over a dispute with a white farmer, and they were shot multiple times. We're approaching Dexter Avenue Memorial Baptist Church, Dr. King's first church as a young pastor. The church was the site for the meetings that culminated in the decision to boycott the Montgomery bus system after Rosa Parks' arrest. The sanctuary is still in its original condition, including windows, floors, and pews. Johnny Mae Chapel was a black woman killed in Florida and was one of only a few that had a conviction, even though it was a small sentence. And I'm sure you're familiar with Emmett Till, a young boy who was brutally murdered for, I don't know, they said he was flirting with a white woman. And years later, she recanted, and his killers were never brought to justice. And the Capitol was 2 blocks from the church. This is the entrance to the Rosa Parks Museum. When we got inside, they had a replica of the bus, and we stood on the actual concrete that was moved to the site, and that was quite moving to stand on where she stood. We stood where she stood. Bronze statue. Her arrest site was marked by a plaque dedicated to honor her activism. Her husband left her shortly after because he feared for his safety, and she relocated to Detroit. The fountain in the center of town was known as the Slave Market, and as such has a historical marker. Okay, the Frank Johnson marker in courthouse was named for another Court of Appeals judge for the 11th Circuit. He was nationally known for his fearless, uncompromising jurist who rendered numerous landmark decisions, including authorizing the Selma to Montgomery March. This is at the Lowndes County Interpretive Center on the way to Selma, where the marchers had a tent city where they stayed and had food and shelter for the 54-mile march from Selma to Montgomery. And I thought this was interesting that back in the day that they were so organized that they could, it was 4 days march, and each day they walked 16 miles. And it culminated in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Okay, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, site of the Bloody Sunday confrontation, where marchers were met with fire hoses and dogs under Bull Connor, the sheriff. And this is the Freedom Riders marker. And now we're at the entrance to the National Memorial. The sculpture, I hope I say this name right. Ninchin was by an African artist by the name of Kwame Akoto Bamfo, and the title means "Life's Journey is Twisted." It was a beautiful sculpture, and I took a picture of this lady because she looked like, even though she was in chains, she wasn't bound. Okay, we're walking the path to the hanging, what were they called? Resembled bodies. And they were hanging upside down, and you walk up a path, and then they're at eye level. And then when we walk to the right, the path descends, and the sculptures get over our head. Okay, that's the lynching site. That's the high part of the museum. And these are examples of why people were lynched. And that's taken from the book.
We're from that town.
Oh.
Who said that?
I did.
Somebody in the
We're
back.
from that town.
Okay,
That's where we're from. From Georgia. The one, the previous slide.
Okay, we're down at the third level where the bodies are overhead, and there are more than 90 blacks who were lynched for many social transgressions at this level. Oh, we have to go over. Okay, the glass enclosure which held the soil from lynching sites from across the country. Okay, the end of the walkway, this is the low part of the museum grounds, and looking up is where the lynching actually took place at the high part of the grounds. And this is Monument Park, which holds duplicate monuments that are waiting to be claimed. Now we're making our way to the exit, and we see the sculpture Guided by Justice, emblematic of the women's struggle supporting the Montgomery boycott. Now we reach the final sculpture, Raise Up, which dramatizes the issues of police violence and racially biased criminal laws. Just outside the exit, we reach the Memorial Garden, a serene and beautiful setting for reflection and remembrance. Okay, that's the Montgomery boycott bus sign. After we left the museum, we went to a Black-owned restaurant called Dreamland for a much-needed respite.
There's Valerie, Veronica, and Vivian there. I had 3 V's.
And that's the soil at the EJI's office.
Is that the soil where lynchings took place, did you say?
Yeah. Okay, we're heading back to our hotel, and we pass the rear of the Capitol and the Confederate White House. Then I'm going to try to read this quote from Maya Angelou. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And my conclusion, we believe that telling the truth about the age of racial terror and reflecting on this period and its legacy can lead to a more thoughtful and informed commitment to justice today. The whitewash of this harsh reality continues in the form of police brutality. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, and Eric Garner, to name just a few of the young Black people killed by police without justice. Our hidden history of achievement, such as Daniel Hale Williams, who performed the first open-heart surgery, Bessie Coleman, airplane pilot performing stunts in a New York air show, Katherine Johnson, the NASA mathematician who was featured in Hidden Figures, Gladys West, who helped develop the GPS for the Navy, and Henry Sampson, the cell phone inventor. The current administration's cruel child separation policy shows the indifference and neglect for the welfare for people of color. The recent blackface scandal highlights the hate and exploitation of blacks by whites and further demonstrates the systemic cultural bias that still exists. As a nation, we should move beyond the stigma of race to ensure that all have equal opportunity to enjoy those promises that are contained in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. As blacks have endured bias and violence, the way forward should include the acknowledgement by whites that blacks are equal and human. We must be witnesses to truth, for we know that when truth is hidden, ignorance is the result.
Holding our questions, I'm sure there's lots that we would want to ask our presenters, but let us go on to Alicia.
I speak to reflection, a personal response to an experience, a reading, or a specific question. My response is based on my memories, past and present. First, my memories. I remember during Jim Crow laws having spent summers in Salisbury, Maryland, where my father's parents lived. I remember the colored-only signs at drinking fountains, bus stations, movie theaters, and sitting up in the balcony to watch movies. Since I was young, I don't remember questioning the signs or adults explaining what they meant. I didn't really experience what I had come to know as racial discrimination until my family moved from a relatively progressive town, Tarrytown in Westchester County, New York, to Austin, known for Sing Sing Prison, just 15 minutes north. Tarrytown, Croton-on-the-Hudson, and nearby Briarcliff were home to prominent blacks, Camp Calloway, Lorraine Hansberry, C.J. Walker, the first black female millionaire, whose house was designed by the first registered black architect in New York, V.W. Tandy, and C.B. Powell, a major journalist. In stark contrast, Austin residents voted for George Wallace, and discriminatory real estate practices which restricted black people's housings and included rent flying. My parents bought a house on a street called Independence Place, ironically. There were 2 black families, but soon the street became all black. My father, a veteran, had great difficulty in obtaining a VA mortgage until a white judge from our Episcopalian church, a prominent member of the community, stepped in. In grammar school, I was accused of plagiarism in my English class and not praised when I discovered short cuts in math. In the math class, I was told to keep quiet. In high school, I had experiences where white teachers either tried to fail me, lessen my accomplishments academically, made fun of my work in front of classmates, or called upon me to speak for the entire black race. One example being The Black Boy by William Blake. I was the only black person in a special high school academic class based on James B. Conant's teachings, while the rest of the black students were channeled to less vigorous academic courses, trade, secretarial courses, or relying on sports for college. My parents were under pressure to have me removed from my class. I was not aware of this push until long after I graduated. I graduated from Boston University, where I later learned that Martin Luther King had attended, and subsequently went on to NYU Law School and the Graduate Business School, known as Stern in New York, without incident. It was at BU that I had my second mentor, a male white professor who wrote my recommendation for law school. My first mentor was also a white English professor in my senior year. Before my last semester at BU, I went to Europe alone and traveled to Ireland, England, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Israel, Amsterdam, and Brussels. This was the grand tour to my classical education. I met other cultures where I was not defined by my color or lack of it, but by the person I was. This had a profound effect on me for the rest of my life. As the last incident I and a friend experienced in the U.S. was a refusal to be served at the Tarrytown Hilton lunch counter before going to the airport in 1968. As you grew up, you heard warnings. What neighborhoods where you would be harassed? Greenwich, Connecticut, South Boston. Forget even traveling down south, especially on the back roads. And DWB, driving while black, was the reason black motorists were ticketed by New Jersey state troopers. In my professional career, I think I faced more sex discrimination than racial. But I was also fired from a position when my boss learned I was black. And in another situation, I was ruled out as an applicant because I was black. It was the time of affirmative action, so you often heard whites thinking you were getting an unfair advantage in employment and education, and you yourself wondered why you got the job sometimes. These vestiges still exist today. So fast forward. When I retired, I worked in 2 community colleges in Connecticut. Most of the black professors were relegated to entry-level courses including myself, some of which was by choice, but some of which appeared to be a pattern of design. When I retired to Lewes, my husband and I found it difficult to build our house. One leader of an adjacent HOL told us to go back where we came from. It was hilarious to me because I wasn't sure whether that meant the suburbs of New York, Connecticut, New York City, or Africa. I became active in the local community and began to become aware of our hidden history by joining the SDARJ and their book club, Who Can Forget Mass Incarceration by Michelle Alexander, and decided to go on my own journey to educate myself about Black history in America. In my quest, I visited New Orleans, Savannah, Atlanta, Charleston, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., Charlottesville, Memphis, museums, the homes and slave quarters of Jefferson and Madison, slave auctions and warehousing sites, segregated cemeteries and beaches, and places where Black people were lynched. Importantly, I discovered Denmark Vesey, a Black man who tried to leave a slave auction in Charleston, South Carolina. I recently read a book about William Tillman, who has some ties to Delaware, who was a Black cook on a ship captured by the Confederacy. Tillman, a free Black man, fought and murdered his way to New York City. I learned about other slave insurrections and that we were not the docile, childlike people who only liked to dance, sing, play the fool, and accept our fate as historically portrayed. Rather, we fought to keep our culture alive, to communicate with other tribes, to keep our families together, and to become educated. History of my era, written largely by whites, ignored the hypocrisy of slavery in a democratic country, overlooked the evils of slavery, the lynchings, the beatings, the starvation, destruction of family, and through Jim Crow, depriving former slaves the opportunity to become full citizens. Racism and how to combat it was never discussed in our household, so I learned it on my own. I don't know if it was too painful for my parents to discuss, or they thought that fleeing north made it a new day. But I also realized that there was an unspoken uneasiness in my household that was passed on to me. So I was afraid and fearful without knowing why. Later I gave that anxiety a name: white privilege, racial discrimination, a vestige of Jim Crow racism and the Ku Klux Klan embodied in the memorial. When I learned of the memorial, I knew I had to go to Montgomery, not only because it housed the memorial, but because it was a historic site for many other areas displaying the black people's struggle for equality. I have a handout. Some of you may have picked it up before you came out. There are some in the back. If you run out, you can see me. I can get them to you. So first I looked up the definition of lynching. I thought the definition should be of white lynching. There should be a separate definition for the lynching of Black people, which would incorporate: 1, women, even pregnant, and children were lynched. The use of the French word picnic in Jim Crow, where lynching of Black people was planned and celebrated as if going to a carnival. 3, Black lynching included living mutilation, and torture to extend the entertainment value of the event, and much like religion celebrate religious relics, the utter depravity of taking souvenirs of the deceased. Finally, guilt or innocence were irrelevant. Convenience was paramount. The only metaphor I can envision is the Holocaust. The difference being that in Black lynching, victims are usually isolated and not known to survive. In the handout, you can read about the lynching by state and race. It is important to note that not only Blacks were lynched. I want to see these are the only documented lynchings. I learned recently that a relative of mine from Maryland was probably lynched in jail for allegedly having sex with a white woman. His father was told that he had committed suicide in jail. Going to pick up his son's body, he had said to find him covered in bruises. Did he beat himself before committing suicide? You can also read about the Newcastle, Delaware lynching and the Jesse Washington lynching, which are some of the more gruesome. Also the lynching of Joseph Shipp, which involved the United States Supreme Court. Finally, I've included a lynching site which was shown in Valerie's slides in Monroe, Georgia, involving the two couples where one of the women was pregnant. This lynching apparently continues to be reenacted to this day. Currently, I am also investigating the segregation in Delaware, including the history of blacks in Lewes, as well as the slow integration of Milford schools and laws against interracial marriage. You will note also that the table only goes to 1968. There have been traditional lynches reported since that date, and I've included what I call modern-day police lynchings. I can never forget the 1991 televised beating of Rodney King, where the police suffered no penalty. So why am I surprised that even today, when beatings or killings are recorded live, there were and are very few repercussions for the police? So, to the memorial. You enter the memorial, not missing the topography of the site, the graphic sculptures of enslavement, and then gradually to ascend to a structure of hundreds of massive overhanging copper prisms, not quite an obelisk listing names, county, and states of victims. To say it is overwhelming is not to do it justice. Your heart and soul can hear the screams, the terror, and the roar of the crowd as you read the names. But after a while, it is too overwhelming, too painful, but you must endure it. You cannot escape it because it is your history. I remember Nina Simone's version of Strange Fruit playing in my head, yet no text, no poetry, and no song can ever describe the primal sadness along with the rage. The killers and mobs thought of black people less than human, property to be disposed of in any manner possible, revealing their own fears of black people's culture, abilities, and sexuality. These events, like the Holocaust, can never be explained to me. The mob and the pack mentality which permits such bestiality. In the end, I find myself sadder than angry, not forgiving because I can see the evil dancing through the corridors. I can and would not be silent any longer, but must use my voice. And as they say in New York, if you see something, say something. In summary, I felt, in observing the sheer magnitude of the hanging copper prisms, so neatly in their robes, and the silence, even the visitors, black, white, and those with foreign tongues whisper as if in a holy or sacred place, knowing some victims have yet to be discovered, remembered, or revered. Rage at the senseless slaughter, to realize black people were sport. Sorrow so profound that it seeps through every cell of my body, and I am forced to sit and rock my body when I come to the mason jars holding samples of the earth where the lynchings took place. Yet peace. I am in a mass grave, lynchings in a lynching cemetery where the dead are revealed. Victims no longer isolated, but standing in silent testimony of their stories. So I say to you, I see white privilege as the natural heir of Jim Crow, and to come away from the memorial and not to understand Kaepernick's defiance due to the third verse of our national anthem or the slogan Black Lives Matter is incomprehensible. Unlike Sisyphus, let American history embrace the noble and the ignoble past. When Francis Scott Key wrote that poem that would in 1931 become our national anthem and proclaim our nation the land of the free, Key not only profited from slaves, he harbored racist conceptions of American citizenship and human potential. Africans in America, he said, were a distinct and inferior race of people, which all experience proves to be the greatest of evil that afflicts the community. His third verse reads, "No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight and the gloom of the grave." Why are blacks being told that all lives matter, not just black lives? Of all the people, black people realize that all life is valuable, but we don't seem to be included in all people. We see that black lives back then and even now do not seem to hold the value of whites in this country. So if I have the time, I would like to read a poem written by James Weldon Johnson, known as the Black National Anthem. Some of you have this poem, and if Kathleen is here and raise her hand, will you start? Okay. Lift every voice and sing till heaven ring, ring the harmonies of liberty. Let us rejoice in Christ, rise the listening skies. Let every sound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith and the darkness has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stone we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that for tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever, we pray. Bless our feet straight at thee, bless our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. We have one
our panelists as diverse as possible. And so we have Mr. Flood from the Cape Gazette, who, as I said before, could not be with us in the beginning, but is here now to talk about his response to his visit to the memorial.
Pick it up. Is it working?
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you for waiting. Sorry I was late. I was working a little bit. And most of all, and I don't know what was said here earlier, I just want to encourage everyone to go to Montgomery and go to this museum. It's a great place to go. The city itself is interesting. It's not a huge city. It's 200,000 people, bigger than any city in Delaware, certainly, but not a huge city. It looks kind of like a small city. It does not have a big skyline, so it's kind of a small town feel to it. It's got, obviously, a lot of history. It's got a lot of Civil War history. First White House of the Confederacy is there. It's got a lot of civil rights history. Obviously, it's probably said this is where Rosa Parks, of course, was arrested. There's a museum for her there. There's also the church and a parsonage where Martin Luther King Jr. first served. That's also there. And of course, then you've got, there's actually some cultural history there too. It's the birthplace of Nat King Cole, and Hank Williams made his home there for a while. So you have two of the giants of 20th century music, both associated with Montgomery. One more famous name associated with the area is F. Scott Fitzgerald. He and his wife lived there for briefly, and he wrote part of Tender as a Night there. And there's a house there and a little museum there. So there's also that there. There's other things too. There's a lot there to go to. As far as the museum, part of the reason I really want to encourage people is that I know for myself, part of the reason I went because I knew Brian in high school. I played soccer with Brian and his brother Howard in high school, and that's at least part of the reason I went. But I followed his career since then, and certainly enjoyed his book. Came out a couple of years ago, Just Mercy, a terrific book. And so that was part of the reason I went. And I'm really glad I went, because if anything, the museum was even better than I thought. It's really a first-class museum. I'm not going to go into the museum itself. I'll just give you a couple of impressions that struck me the most. There were, of course, it tells the story of more than 4,000 lynchings. And that's part of the power of both the museum and the memorial, that you're just struck by not only the numbers, but just by the sheer banality of it, the reasons that people were lynched, almost for no reason, not getting out of someone's way on the sidewalk or the road or something like that could lead to a lynching. But I'll tell you two that struck me the most. One was probably because of my career as a newspaper man, and there was a copy of a newspaper down there, and I just want to read the headline. I think I have it here. This was an actual headline in a newspaper, New Orleans newspaper, June 26, 1919. It said, John Hartfield will be lynched by Ellsville mob at 5 o'clock this afternoon. And sure enough, he was. The governor just washed his hands and said he couldn't do anything about this. An impending murder. It's the only one I know of. There might be others, I suppose, but it really struck me that you had a murder, an impending murder, announced, and nothing was done. And he was murdered. The other one was kind of a sad case. A man named John Stoner. Of Dawes, Louisiana. And in 1909, he sued a white man. He was an African American who sued a white man who had killed his cow. And what struck me about this, well, here was this man, of course, grew up in the Jim Crow era and knew better as well as anyone what the situation was, and yet he still had enough faith in his fellow man, in the system and the laws of this country, to think that he would get a fair shake. And for that trust, he was lynched. He was hung. They hung him. And this is what's powerful about it. Not only the museum, but then you go to the memorial, you see his name there, and you think about all the ripple effects that this would have had. I mean, not only his friends and family, of course, horrible for them, and of course, acquaintances, maybe people who saw him on the street or in church, but it goes way, way beyond that. It goes, to the next towns, the next county, to the next state. And you think about all the people who were wronged, all the African Americans who might have been wronged in some situation, who might have felt, they should take this guy to court or they should call the police. But what did they do? They said no, or they were told, no, don't do that. You know what happened over there, just let it lie. So those are two of the ones that struck me the most, and I'm sure everyone will go there and have their own things that might strike them the most. But those are the ones that really struck me. I do have one last thing, and this is a picture of my wife and me, with Cory Booker. This was at the memorial. Now, I can't guarantee that everybody who goes there will have his picture taken with a presidential candidate. But there are a lot of them this year, so, fight your way through them. So, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Before we go on to questions and answers, before we hear from the Stevenson family, I owe a big apology to the League. I forgot to, hello. I owe an apology to the League of Women Voters, who was supposed to, before the panel presentation, come and welcome you on behalf of the League. Martha, are you here? Which and forgive me for the oversight. No problem.
First, I would like to thank Charlotte King and the Alliance for Racial Justice for all the hard work that you have put together with this program. And I'm sure everybody in this room is really looking forward to go down there and see this museum. So really, kudos to you all for doing this.
Maybe the camp will get a bus and take a trip down. Halfway. It's on.
Sounds like a good plan. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Martha Redmond, and I am the president of the Sussex County League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which does not support a particular party or candidate. We do take positions on issues after careful study, deliberation, and coming to consensus. We believe in equal rights and opportunity for all, and we strive to promote social and economic justice. The Sussex County League was present at the birth of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. We share their mission of promoting social and economic justice for all. We are proud to co-sponsor this program and hope the public will gain new knowledge and understanding about African American history. As part of the League's mission is to educate the public about upcoming legislation as well as elections. In that vein, we have two upcoming events. One is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact legislation. This is coming before the legislature this session. This legislation would change the way the Electoral College votes are used in Delaware. We are sponsoring a panel discussion which will be held on March the 3rd from 2 to 4 at County Council Chambers in Georgetown. Please plan to attend the discussion and have your questions answered. We will also live stream this event. In light of the upcoming school board elections, we are having a Cape Henlopen School Board Candidates Forum at the Lewes Library on April 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. This is your opportunity to meet the candidates and have your questions answered before the election on May 14th of 2019. We will also have our website, vote411.org, which some of you may be familiar with from the general election, up and running in April for the school board candidate elections in Sussex County. All candidates running for school board seats will have their information as well as answers to questions that we have asked them posted there. All our events are posted on our website, sussexlwv.org, and we hope to live stream both events on our website on the days that they are held. Okay, thank you.
Before we leave the Stevenson family for some remarks, and before we continue with our question and answer, I have to take advantage of the fact that this is our regular town hall meeting. And I have some announcements, just a few. One, I want to remind the audience that if you like going to the movies on the weekend, that this weekend we are having the second annual African American Film Festival at the Cinema Arts Theater. We have 4 films starting Friday evening through 2 on Saturday, 1 on Sunday, and I hope we will see many of you there. If you're going, you need to call and get tickets now. It's a small theater and I don't think it'll accommodate all of you. But please attend that. Also, Don Peterson wanted me to remind everyone that we need help, and we have some sign-in sheets in the back. We have some very active committees. We have a legislative committee, we have an education committee, we have an outreach committee. We need some of you to sit on those committees. So if you're interested, talk to social media committees, sorry about that, and some others. And so at the end, if you have time, see Don and sign in. He and Trina will help you with that. I also, as I started out by saying, and I think our speakers have also talked about the conversation, changing the public narrative, continuing the public discourse. Well, next month we're continuing the discourse with a presentation which is co-sponsored by the Women's March Sussex County. And are we saying Seaside? Where is Sue?
Seaside is supported.
So Seaside Synagogue is supporting it. We are having a town hall meeting on racism and anti-Semitism. Just check our website for more information on that.
Please excuse the interruption. The library will be closing in 15 minutes. Thank you.
But anyway, we hope to see you next week so we can continue. By the way, we don't celebrate Black History Month in February, the Alliance. We celebrate it every month. We do the second Tuesday. We celebrate it the second Tuesday of every month, so please come and join us. Again, you can check our website in terms of how you can bring that about. At this point, let me introduce again Mrs. Barry, Alana Barry, for some brief remarks on behalf of the family, and then we'll have our question and answer. Is that okay with you, ladies? Sure.
Good evening. I am just really excited and blessed to be in a space where we're talking about things that make people uncomfortable, right? We're talking about race, and we're talking about justice, and we're talking about, the current state of our society. And I think I would be remiss not to mention that it's also bittersweet. Because the fact that we're sitting here means that there's still so much more work to be done. But the fact that this room is full and there are people standing in the back also means that we have the chance to really liberate ourselves from our past and create our own future together. And I think that that alone is really encouraging. And so I just wanted to take a second and from the Stevenson family to say thank you. Some of Mr. Flood was with us when the museum opened, and hearing that experience is still impacting him is really encouraging. And hearing that people are, thinking about taking buses down to go to see the memorial is really encouraging as well. So I just wanted to take a second to introduce some activities that are happening actually right here in Sussex County related to Bryan Stevenson. And so first is the Milton Historical Society will be opening an exhibit in May called Walking into Greatness, and it is about Bryan's life, and it juxtaposes his life in the context of our local history here in Sussex County and our national history. So really kind of starting from Brown versus Board of Education, and then his life taking us to kind of current day, and the founding of the museum and memorial in Alabama. Second, I am pleased to announce that myself and a board of 13 other people are founding a public school here in Sussex County called the Bryan Allen Stevenson School of Excellence. We are committed to changing the narrative and creating opportunities for kids here in Sussex County. More specifically, one of the principles that Bryan always talks about and was mentioned on the panel today is getting proximate, and that it was through proximity, it was through when he started to go into the prisons and actually see and hear the stories of people that it changed his outlook on life, really. It changed his life trajectory and led to the founding of the Equal Justice Initiative. And I believe that if we provide students, particularly high school students, with opportunities to get proximate with the community through service learning, where they'll have opportunities to work in local soup kitchens, to work with Habitat for Humanity and other agencies and organizations, and to actually see what the needs are of their own community, that ultimately that will lead to innovation here, and that our kids will invest in their own community. And so there are kind of several board members throughout the audience, and we'll stay
up a little higher, because I'm just kidding.
If you're associated with the school, if you could just wave your hand so that people know where you are. Please just come up and talk to us. We'd be happy to talk to you. You can find out more on our website, which is vasseinc.org, to learn a little bit more about the school as well. And so we're just really excited to be here, to be with you all, and to share what's happening. And the legacy of Bryan is having an impact here in Sussex County, and we're really excited about that.